Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 42 of Weekend Warriors on GranTurismo 6 in particular, and this particular pick of vehicle within the very broad category of sports cars is a car which you might think or may have expected to be, if anywhere, in the Import Knights series, because of course it is a Japanese car, very much so, an iconic and widely loved Japanese car, the Nissan S chassis, or the Silvia, the S15 in particular. But although all of those things are true, this particular version isn't really viewed in the same way as, for instance, the higher performance versions of the Spec R Silvia. Because although technically it's a JDM car, it kind of isn't at the same time. Because this particular version of the S15, the Varietta, is a tin top convertible. And as such, it just has a look and a feel and kind of a marketing setup surrounding it, which makes it much more like a cruising convertible, a stylish piece, rather than a full-on performance car, which is of course what the models like the Spec R are. So what's the deal with this car? Because of course we don't have the option to use convertible roofs on the game. We cannot make the roof go up and down. So apart from being a gimmick, what does it actually have to offer? Well, it does look different for a start to the other S15s. And I know some of you guys agree with me that this is actually a very good looking convertible. The Silvia is already a good looking car to begin with as a coupe. It certainly suits the shape of being a coupe, but it actually works surprisingly well as a convertible as well, despite the fact that in particular the roofline and the rear shape of the car are quite drastically changed compared to the coupe version. The trunk, for instance, or the boot as we call it here in the UK, is chunkier and thicker looking at the back than the coupe version is, which has a sleeker, cleaner look to it. But surprisingly, to me at least, and I know for some of you guys as well, that doesn't ruin the look of the car. I really do think that this car suits being a convertible. Now, apart from being the more stylish open-top version of a great performance car, does it actually have said performance to match up to the coupe version? Not necessarily the full-on Spec R models, but at least to some of the maybe lesser powered S15s. Well, yes, it can. It doesn't have the same level of spec, for instance, as the premium model S15 Coupe, but you wouldn't expect it to. That car's got over 500 horsepower, it's fast, it's got visual upgrades, it's the essence of a JDM car, massively popular for drifting, etc. Whereas this one, well, you don't really see many people using it, you don't really hear many people talk about it, and even in real life, it's just a kind of car which tends to be forgotten. They sell very cheap second-hand, and even though they are cheap, you still don't see many of them around that much. So what does it actually have to offer? Well, for the price tag of 28 grand, or a fraction under, which is a pretty good start, you get a 2-litre turbo engine. It retains the rear-wheel drive, thankfully. Sometimes manufacturers like to pull weird changes, like making specialist versions front-wheel drive for no apparent reason, and that does occasionally happen. Thankfully that didn't with this one, and it does very much so retain the beautiful drift setup of the S chassis vehicles. You can definitely use this as a drift car, and the fact that it is a different version of what is one of the most popular drift options in the game means that you could use this, and although technically you are using an S15, which a lot of other people do use, you're pretty much guaranteed not to see someone else using this same model. Now, you might see someone, but that's very unlikely. It's not a popular car to use, and frankly, it doesn't deserve that unpopularity. This is actually a good car in its own way. It's not amazing, and it certainly isn't as fast as the premium model in particular, but that 2-litre turbo engine gives you some decent numbers. It's nowhere near as powerful as the coupes, but it's not underpowered either. It has 336 horsepower, 245 foot-pounds of torque in fully tuned form, and when you add on top of that the fact that it's not that heavy, which is perhaps surprising for an electronic folding roof, more fashion focused, if you will, vehicle. You'd expect it to maybe have that bit of extra weight due to the fact that they have to make the car stronger to cope with the lack of support from the roof and the pillars of the car. Turning it into an open top usually requires compensation in that regard. The car ends up being heavier. But in the case of this particular car, it really doesn't. It only weighs 1,093 kilos with the full weight loss package, and that's not bad at all. The horsepower per tonne is not huge, but 307 isn't bad, certainly with such a modest amount of power to begin with. And although in particular 336 horsepower is obviously no way near the Spec R versions, and could potentially put people off of buying it, understandably so, the reason why I would say reconsider that thinking is because think of what you get from this. You get 336 horsepower in a specialised, convertible, essentially fashion car. What kind of rivals does this car have on the game? Well, it doesn't really have many. It has stuff like the Peugeot 307cc or the 206cc and a number of other more fashion-oriented versions of existing hatchbacks or coupes to go up against. And of those rivals, this is one of, if not the best, of those convertible tin-top cars. It retains the fantastic handling and driftability of the coupe, but offers different visuals, and yes, less power of course, and it is slower in a straight line, but it's not a slow car. Around the track it is good, especially on technical circuits where top-end power doesn't matter as much. And the fact that the PP level is actually quite modest at 482 means that it could be more useful than you may initially think. But that's it for this pick overall. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.